More than 30 years after its inception, the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis, persists in the hearts of many a gamer the world over. This 16-bit machine helped put Sega on the map, delivering a wonderful library of fast, beautiful 16-bit games that resonated deeply with the gaming audience. And it's perhaps this love which has inspired a new generation of game developers to keep the dream alive, to develop their own games for this classic machine. And today, we're looking at two of them, Tanglewood from Big Evil Corporation and Xeno from Bitmap Bureau, a delicious duo of modern games designed and released for Sega's original Mega Drive over the last couple years. Welcome to the first video in our developer-focused series brought to you by Digital Foundry and Barclays, where we discuss the creation of new games with the people that made them. For this episode, I've spoken with the developers behind these games to better understand the process of building them. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Mega Drive means quite a lot to me. I guess it's because of one of the first consoles I ever owned from about the age of 8-9 years old. It was something my parents bought me. I didn't exactly come from a rich family, so it would have been quite a big deal to have been bought a console like that. Some of my favourites were things like the Disney games, Pocahontas, The Lion King, that sort of stuff. Really fluid animation. And of course Sonic series, Sonic 1, Sonic 2.
It was such a great looking machine, and coming from the NES, it was such a great big jump from the NES to the Mega Drive, just in the way the machine looked, but also the games, going from 8-bit to 16-bit graphics, and the amazing Yamaha sound chip.
Yeah, for me it was the console I never owned. I used to go at Christmas to my cousin's house and used to just have a great time playing Sonic and all the classic Sega games there, and I was just desperate to go back, be that other holidays or the next Christmas, see what else they had got.
As Sega's most successful home console with nearly 50 million units sold, it's no wonder that it remains popular even to this day. Sega was the first to market with a true 16-bit console, with its potent combination of a Motorola 68000 CPU, a powerful VDP, and a capable sound processor. The Mega Drive managed to offer an experience not far off from Sega's arcade games of the time. The system lived a long life before being replaced by the Saturn and eventually the Dreamcast. As the 90s came to a close, however, Sega and the rest of the world had moved on, but deep down there was still much love for the system, and this is perhaps the seed which would lead to the creation of games like Tanglewood and Xeno. But before we dive into their creation, perhaps we should discuss what these two games are about. Tanglewood is a puzzle platform game that takes place over a multitude of stages. Players control the fox-like creature Nim as he makes his way across this strange alien world. You'll gain powers, solve puzzles, and even make a new friend. It's a heartwarming but somewhat dark game. Now, Xeno is a top-down, room-by-room, procedurally generated shooter in the vein of Smash TV. It's tough as nails, and you'll have to blast your way through each room and take out big bosses on the way to the end. You can also upgrade your weapons between different levels. The two games are extremely different, but both embody a style of gameplay that feels right at home on the Sega Mega Drive. While the hardware may be outdated, tackling a game for an older console is a difficult task, but the creators have had plenty of experience in the games industry before tackling 16-bit development. Matt Phillips, for instance, the creator of Tanglewood, got his start in the industry right after university with Traveler's Tales.
I've worked on, I think, 13 Lego games there, as well as one movie. We used the game engine to render a film. Then I moved to Crytek UK, worked on Homefront: The Revolution, and a port of Timesplitters 2 to PS4 and Xbox One, which is hidden within the game. Since then I've been working for Double 11 Limited on ports of games like Goat Simulator, Songbringer. I went back to Lego games for a bit, which was interesting, and recently Rust console.
Bitmap Bureau followed a different path, however.
I started in the games industry at 19 back in 1995, working for SCi, and yeah, I was working in the QA department there, where I got to test games like Carmageddon and Swift 3D, which you might also know. But yeah, from there I joined IO Productions, which was the sort of the pre-runner to IOMO. So there we were making a Dreamcast game called Stampede.
The concept behind Stampede was to create a herding game with some puzzle elements. Switching between a dog and a farmer, you would spend your time moving through these worlds, herding animals between different gates. Sadly, Stampede never saw the light of day, but the transition from IO Productions to IMO would lead to a critical meeting for Mike and his partner.
So yeah, Mike and I started working together back around about 2004, 2005 at a mobile game studio called IOMO. And we created some of the sort of early mobile games back right from sort of black and white through to early colour and just about touching 3D.
These early mobile efforts ultimately led to the two splitting up and working on new projects, but eventually they found each other once again, and they formed Bitmap Bureau. But where did this idea for building a Mega Drive game even stem from?
We quite like going to game jams, and Mike had been to quite a number and done quite well, and then finally tempted me along to one. I didn't really fancy doing anything, I guess, normal, so I just said, let's create a Mega Drive game. So rocked up with a Mega Drive and a EverDrive cart so that we could put ROMs on it. Had just about downloaded the SGDK, and we gave it a go over 48 hours, and it was a bit crazy, wasn't it? But we managed to achieve a pretty cool, well, more like a first level of a game. We were quite proud of it. It was quite impressive to see it running on the real hardware. And then I guess it was over the few months that came after that, we just kept niggling us like, why don't we try this for real? You know, this could be really good fun.
With Matt Phillips, however, the desire to build a Mega Drive game ran deeper.
That's something I wanted to do since I was a child. I grew up with the Commodore 64. I had one of those shortly after having a Mega Drive, so the two loves of gaming and programming combined from a very young age. And all through my early teens I wanted to make a game for this machine. But it never really quite happened. Dev hardware wasn't available, so it just kind of disappeared for a while until my early 20s, when I started to pick up interest in it again. And then I started collecting development hardware. I got the opportunity to pick up a original Mega CD development kit, as well as some other bits and pieces. I've got a 32X, Sega Saturn stuff, Dreamcast, a couple of other bits and pieces. There's an N64 dev kit there. I just started this weird little collection of development kits and decided that I wanted to make a game for all of them. I wanted to learn how they all worked, starting obviously with the Mega Drive, so that's where this project came around.
So at this point, both creators had decided that they wanted to build a new Mega Drive game. The question they faced, and the question anyone wanting to take on such a task might also face, is where do you even start? With modern games, anyone can get their feet wet by downloading something like Unreal Engine or Unity. But the Mega Drive? Well, one solution, as Matt Cope noted earlier, is Stefan D's SGDK. This freely available software development kit allows you to write code for the system using C as opposed to assembly, though Xenocrisis does rely partially on assembly code. This is a great way to get started with the Mega Drive. For Tanglewood, however, Matt Phillips decided to go full-on, writing the game in pure assembly, using a real development kit. Well, at least eventually.
Well, the first steps were trying to get the kit to work, which didn't happen for a very long time. I got quite frustrated with it. It was very damaged, there were pieces missing. I didn't know how to use it once it was up and running. So for the time being, I started using emulators and things. So I had a small development environment which was just Notepad++ and an assembler basically, and an emulator. I learned really basic things like how to move registers around, how to add numbers together, things like that. Because the Mega Drive doesn't come with any kind of standard library. You can't just type hello world and hit run. You have to tell it what a font is, you have to tell it what the glyphs are. You have to upload the font to memory, you have to show it where on screen to show each glyph and things like that, and you have to write a lot of routines to handle all this. It really does start with a blank slate. You switch the machine on, there's nothing there. So it's very far from a modern development environment, so I was very much out of my comfort zone.
But getting to that point, to a game like this, was of course a long and arduous journey. Matt continued learning and experimenting with the systems and started to make some progress.
Very slowly managed to get some sort of a toolkit together for a basic platformer with a static floor. And for that I used ripped Sonic sprites because I can't draw. So yeah, for a very long time I had Sonic running around in a sort of hand-drawn world I made in MS Paint. But it was all I needed to get started. I had a character in a world. I could move him, I could scroll the scenery around. I implemented basic things like jumping, some pickups and stuff like that. And all the while I still didn't have a game in mind. This was still just an experiment. I didn't really think I'd get much further than that though.
For Bitmap Bureau, however, Matt Cope experimented with the Mega Drive hardware, creating various demo programs, including this one with a 3D rotating X, as well as a single-screen prototype of a character running around the screen. At this point in our story then, both developers had managed to create demos that run on the Mega Drive. They now had the power to build something real. The next question became then, how do you decide what to make?
I think it's largely down to the quality of the Super Smash TV port on the Mega Drive. I felt it was a bit disappointing for such a great title. And having played Shock Troopers, which used an interesting strafe mechanism, I thought that could be applied to Smash TV. So that was really the basis of the game. It's just about, getting someone running around the room shooting things, which is always a pretty good formula anyway. If you look back at Robotron and Berserk, the actual gameplay prototyping took place in Flash because that's what I've done for a number of years now, and it's very quick to put something together in Flash. Whilst Matt was looking into the Mega Drive side of things, I was looking into the game design side of things, and eventually we'd sort of merge and hopefully make the game work on the Mega Drive.
So Xeno Crisis would become an overhead shooting game inspired by the likes of Super Smash TV. But what about Matt Phillips and what would become Tanglewood?
I think early on I kind of had it in my head that I want to do a platform of some kind because they are my favourite kind of games, especially my favourite kind of games on the Mega Drive, so it kind of made sense to start there. I'd also been playing a lot of Limbo at the time, one of my favourite games of all time, and the first plan was just to do a port of that because I'm not an artist, I didn't have any friends helping me. And those were in a silhouette style I could probably trace out and implement for myself. So it wasn't even going to be my own game at first, it was going to be a kind of demo of the first couple of levels of Limbo. I started showing some of this to some friends on social media, it pretty much exploded. I had a lot of comments from a lot of people saying, you got to take this seriously and you can do this, you can actually make your own game. So I had a couple of friends helping at that point, so people helped me with character design and things like that. So I went back to the drawing board and actually started writing a proper game. I knew I wanted to do something not quite cutesy and pretty, it needed to be a little bit unsettling. I really enjoy games like Abe's Odyssey, Flashback, Another World, Limbo, Inside, those kind of things. Slightly dark and unsettling games. I thought the Mega Drive needed another one of those. So the game kind of lures you into a sense of false positivity, really, by starting you out in a nice cute environment and then suddenly turning a little bit nasty. That's precisely what I was going for in the end.
Now that they had established what type of game would be made, it was time to get serious about making it. But where would the funding come from? Well, this is where the rise of Kickstarter played a role.
Originally I didn't even want to do a Kickstarter, it didn't even cross my mind. I had a lot of friends egging me on saying that this could go somewhere, you need to start taking this seriously. Try and get some funding, try and take some time out of work and hammer this properly. So I looked at all sorts of solutions, trying to get publishers interested, it didn't really go anywhere. I didn't really want to go through all the trouble of doing a Kickstarter because it was going to be a massive job. It was also going to be my life for the next couple of years. Essentially a pre-order system where I kind of owe people a game. At the same time, that would have egged me on to actually get it finished because then I've got these constant pokes at, So it turned out to be the right tool for the job. in the end. I had a couple of people help me set up the page, try and get my wording right, and then I sat and downed half a bottle of whiskey before I hit that button because I couldn't do it.
And how about Bitmap Bureau?
So yeah, we decided quite early on that we thought we'd launch the game via a Kickstarter. It'd just been one of those things we'd wanted to do. I think we'd missed the boat on the more major sort of modern game releases on Kickstarter. They were sort of probably waning at the point that we decided to do one. But we felt that the community behind the Mega Drive was there. And some of the guys we'd already been dealing with were just amazing, really helpful and so insightful and knowledgeable about the system. So yeah, we sort of clobbered together the Kickstarter page, sourced in all the bits. It was all a bit last minute. We were desperate to get out. Probably we were originally aiming for November. We wanted it sort of done before Christmas, but we didn't quite make it. So we ended up having to sort of launch over Christmas, and that's what everyone said was like the worst thing you could do on Kickstarter. And we put it up. I remember sitting here first thing on, I think it was like a Monday morning, wasn't it? We set it live about 10 o'clock in the morning. And we were just like, oh, I hope someone buys a copy or commits to it, the next 24 hours. And I think within a few minutes we had our first order. And funnily enough, I think it was pretty much Matt Phillips from Tanglewood. And so yeah, and then really the rest is history in the sense that the next 24, 48 hours was just insane. We just couldn't believe the response, and obviously reconfirmed what we thought, that we thought we had a good idea for a game. But we were just so amazed to see the passion and excitement in the community for a new Mega Drive title.
The games were funded, the interest was there, but now it was time to get serious. Now in the case of Tanglewood, Matt had already made good progress in building a prototype before launching on Kickstarter. He developed ideas for the game that were already implemented to some degree, puzzle concepts, level design, and more. It seems that the game was really starting to take shape at this point. But one of the most important aspects in building Tanglewood are the tools.
Started writing my own tools just to try and simplify it a little bit. Ever since then I've been writing this whole set of tools called Beehive, which is my Mega Drive art suite. And originally that could just do basic things like import bitmaps and export them as maps, so I could use for the foreground and background layers. Then I added things like collision to it, where you could draw floors and walls and hills using Bezier splines, and then started to add little touches like sprite animation editors and things like that to it, and over the years it's grown to this behemoth of a tool, and most of the game was then developed on that from that point on.
For Xeno Crisis, Bitmap Bureau relied heavily on features available in the SGDK, though a lot of customization was required. So what were some of the challenges faced during development?
The biggest issue probably on the Mega Drive with sprites and just in general with all the artwork is the limited palette range. We found that the way that Henk approached this was really smart. So you have one palette for the background, and that changes on a per level basis, obviously with the different colour background themes. You have one palette for the players, and that merges in the blue and the green two-player option on the player colours. And then there's a third palette, which is the alien palette, and that basically stays the same throughout the whole game. And the three main sort of alien Xenoid characters in the game all fit within that palette. I remember when Henk sent me the first image of that, I sort of started and sent him back a message saying, oh, it looks really amazing, Henk, but the problem is we've got to fit this into the palette limitations, and then had to eat my words when I checked in Photoshop and saw that it all fitted within 16 colours, including the transparency. Yeah, and then the fourth palette is the effects palette. And for us that works really well. Yeah, pickups, all that sort of HUD and stuff fits into that palette. So during the game it's actually quite straightforward. We play the game, and when you reach a boss, we sometimes load in a boss palette to replace the alien palette, and do various effects with that. So that the palette side of things really came from Henk, but it was a really great way to work. And then the sprites, yeah, they went in pretty straightforward. Looked at various timings and tweaking of the sprite sheets, and trying to avoid where we could multi-sprites. The maximum size of a sprite on Mega Drive being 32 by 32 pixels. So we just tried to limit those to the bosses or certain particular enemies. And then really the backgrounds, that was that form the map, that was probably the biggest amount of work in the whole game in terms of technology. Was writing custom tools to take parts and segments of maps and layouts, and then procedurally generating the maps, obviously efficiently enough on the Mega Drive, and not just an individual room, connecting rooms and flow and going collecting keys to unlock doors, and also with some of the levels where you transition through the style of graphics as you go, so like the vines might sort of gradually build up through the level until you sort of reach a fully covered vine door at the end. So yeah, it was a lot of hard work going into the crunching of the tiles and the textures, but fortunately it all sort of worked out quite nicely in the end.
Another critical part of each game is the sound, and these two games couldn't be more different in that regard. Tanglewood opts for a subdued soundscape, one that uses musical cues in select circumstances, while Xeno Crisis is hot and heavy with pumping tunes throughout. So the question I had was, how did you find the musical talent responsible for scoring each game, and how did it actually work?
The music was composed by Nathan Stanley, goes by the name Freeze Dream. He contacted me during the Kickstarter to ask if I needed any help with it. That started quite a long working relationship, and he recorded probably 90% of the game's music and audio. I wanted something a bit cinematic, so I wanted effective use of silence, and I wanted music to be cues when something interesting happens rather than constant looping BGM. And I was taking inspiration from games like Another World, Flashback, like that, where it's just ambient sounds while you're moving, and music playing when something of interest happens.
For Xeno Crisis, however, a very different approach was required.
I felt we needed something really heavy and gritty. And during the prototype, we were using the Thunder Force 4 soundtrack. And we wanted something to replace that, which would match it, really. And I've been looking around for suitable musicians on YouTube and came across a guy called Savage Regime. He seemed to be making music that sounded like it came from a Mega Drive, but I wasn't entirely convinced that it was. So yeah, I approached the guy, and he assured me that it was proper Mega Drive music, and it could actually be played back on actual hardware. And yeah, there was one track in particular by a band called Sky Harbor that he covered. The track was called Traeus, and we used that in the prototype, and it just fit the game perfectly. And from that point, we just knew we had to get Savage Regime on board.
Yeah, the sound, again, was really massive thanks to Stefan de Longueville with SGDK. There's an XGM playback library there. It's able to take a VGM file, usually generated via the tools like Defilmask, and then we wrote an extra sort of tool just to sort of compact down multiple music files into one sort of sound table. But yeah, that works amazing for the music, and by some wizardry he's done in the assembly, you can mix 4 PCM channels. So one of those is used by the music, and the remaining 3 channels, the 3 files that are mixed down into one channel, they give us the ability for the sound effects. And so yeah, that's really worked really solid for us. Been an amazing bit to have resolved, because I think on these older retro devices, that audio is probably the hardest bit to get right.
But of course, the artwork itself is also a key part of the visual experience. For this, both developers sought external talent.
Most of the character design was done by Armin Marderosian, who approached me during the Kickstarter to ask if I needed help, and the environment art was a guy called Matthew Weeks of Freedom Planet fame.
Together they helped define the unique look of the game, creating beautiful subdued hues, expressive characters and enemies, alongside a brilliant use of color. For Xeno Crisis, Bitmap Bureau was targeting a rather different look. The main gameplay art, as noted earlier, was crafted by industry legend Henk Nieborg, who's been creating pixel art since 1990. For the character artwork, used in cutscenes and the like, they worked with the super talented Menabde. Personally, I feel both games are a masterclass in visual design, a perfect fusion of brilliant artwork with the technical chops necessary to implement it. At this point, we've heard a lot about each of these games from their respective developers. From Kickstarter until the finish line, there was a lot of work to be done, and each faced a wide range of challenges. For Tanglewood though, perhaps the most difficult yet most memorable part of the development doesn't even appear until halfway through the game.
My favourite moment of the development was getting the second character, Echo, working in the game. He's a little sidekick character that you can carry on your shoulders because he doesn't like water. He helps you pick things up, press buttons and stuff. If I ever did a co-op version of the game, it would be starring Nim and Echo. And that was the first time I'd ever worked with AI. I stupidly did my first ever AI work in pure assembly language. It was a ridiculous idea. So yeah, the AI code for the second character ended up being 4,400 lines of code long. It's the biggest file in the game. I don't know if that's because it's complex or I didn't really know what I was doing with AI. But yeah, that was one of the biggest parts of the game and probably the one I'm most proud of.
For Bitmap Bureau, however, one of the biggest challenges was external to the game itself.
We were moving some bits. It was actually, I think, a Frogger cocktail cabinet into the office that was had been in my shed. And yeah, I really whacked my head on a cupboard door. It seemed to be relatively innocuous, but I pretty much knocked myself out. My head was bleeding and I couldn't really talk properly. And so Mike rushed me to hospital. It was relatively back to normal, just really sore head after a few hours there. But then over the coming days, I really got a lot worse and continued struggling to talk. And then, yeah, for me it's pretty much a black hole of a number of months there where I was, there were days I couldn't walk or talk, and really the injury was pretty grim in terms of its long-term damage to me. And I can imagine Mike was probably panicking like crazy, thinking how are we going to...
I was going to finish that game by myself, yeah, that's for sure.
So yeah, I think come late summer and I was still not recovering very fast. I was struggling to program. I was struggling to think. I mean, it was that bad. And so I tried taking on some of the other tasks like that needed doing, like the cover designs and the physical printed media side of things, as much just because they ultimately needed doing, and I just needed to bide myself time. But really that period of injury just prolonged for the longest while, really. I'm still recovering to this day, but I'm much better. But yeah, that was one really massive unexpected in the development schedule, but we sort of pushed through it.
Thankfully, despite this dark moment, the rest of development went smoothly for Bitmap Bureau, to the point where people were skeptical that what they were teasing would even run on the Mega Drive at all. Yet, all along, they knew it was legit, and it was. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to the development here, more than I can possibly fit in this video, but hopefully this provides a nice taste of what it took to reach the finish line. But what about the actual final release? In the end, both games were finished and manufactured as real cartridges. The dream to hold one's own Mega Drive cartridge was fully realized. For Tanglewood, Matt released the game both on the Mega Drive, as a cartridge, and on PC and the Evercade, using the original ROM files. Since then, he's been hard at work on the Switch version of the game, which offers notable improvements, including enhanced background scrolling, an ambient audio track, new gameplay tweaks, additional lore, and more. For Xeno Crisis, with the game written in C, Bitmap Bureau was able to release it across different platforms, including all current generation consoles and even the Sega Dreamcast. Currently, a Neo Geo version is in the works, with enhanced visuals. The road to this point may have been long, but as an outsider and fan of classic gaming, I couldn't be happier with the work these guys achieved. Everyone involved in these dream projects delivered amazing results, leading to something truly special. We can only hope that someday in the future, the dream will continue.